on 531 PI.
It is 8:32. This is Pacific Mornings for Wednesday, the 4th of June. I'm William Terite. Brilliant to have your company as always. Hope you are having a lovely start to your day. Right. Now, Radio New Zealand, or RNZ, is marking a century of broadcasting, reflecting on its evolution from the New Zealand Radio Broadcasting Company in 1925 to today's multifaceted national broadcaster. Now, a key component of RNZ's legacy, of course, is RNZ Pacific, which has been delivering news and information to the Pacific region for over 75 years. Launched as RNZ International as well, and rebranded to RNZ Pacific in 2017, I believe it was. The service continues to provide high-quality news and programming to Pacific audiences. Its commitment to cultural connection is evident in its multilingual broadcasts and the employment of staff who reflect the diversity of the Pacific region. Joining me to discuss this is RNZ Pacific's Moera Tuilaepa-Taylor. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for your time.
Malole soifua, very good morning to you as well.
Look, I mean, it's a mammoth task, isn't it? I mean, you know intimately in terms of bringing news to audiences. I want to reflect perhaps firstly more broadly on RNZ's 100-year history. What do you make of that? It's pretty astonishing in itself, isn't it?
I think it's very significant, obviously 100 years, 75 years of that, over 75 years that you had mentioned also has been shortwave into the Pacific region as well. So there's a strong connection there. And there have been many changes over the year for the company as well. Obviously we recognise digital, how also our audiences consume a lot of our content as well. We also know that radio is still very much king in parts across the Pacific as well, because we know for many of our audiences it's really difficult to possibly access internet because it can be very expensive, and in particular in remote areas as well. So for RNZ it's really important that while we reach all our audiences in Aotearoa, New Zealand as well, it's also really to remember to reach our audiences also in the Pacific region too.
Indeed, and I want to pick up on that. In times of crisis, right, that is when news really is important. And I suppose such as natural disasters. How does RNZ Pacific ensure, as time has gone on, to provide timely and accurate information reaching affected communities like the Pacific?
We do have a cyclone watch service, which we activate in between the cyclone seasons in the Pacific, which is often in November, and through now it kind of tips into a lot into May. And part of that service also is whenever a cyclone is named in the Pacific, we are contacted by the New Zealand Met Service. Then we activate the service and we rebroadcast information, important, vital information also from their authorities in the local communities. For instance, if it's a cyclone in Fiji, then Fiji is the lead forecast in that. It's wherever the cyclone sits in the Pacific, that is the lead forecast for us. It's really important also to remember that we are the support service for a lot of our main broadcasters who are also obviously providing vital, important information to their communities. But often we know that when winds pick up to about 200 kilometres an hour, a lot of infrastructure goes down, and obviously communications can be the first one to go down. So then that's when we just kind of are there in the background supporting the work, obviously, of the local broadcaster, but as we are the backup service. And I do like to remind people of that. It's really important. All our partners in the region are doing fantastic work, but we realise during times of disasters it can be very challenging as well. And that's part of the support work we do there. Also, of course, that Radio New Zealand also is a vital lifeline for a lot of communities throughout Aotearoa, New Zealand. We saw that in Cyclone Gabriel. AM network was so essential, getting that vital information out to communities who by that stage had lost power, lost their cell phones, and were unable to hear what was happening. So that was the important step that RNZ also provides as a service, as a lifeline service.
Indeed. Perhaps a more personal account from yourself now. In your time working for RNZ Pacific, keen to really dissect what changes you've seen inevitably over time as time has passed, and in the way in which you serve the Pacific region.
I think a lot has changed over the years. Definitely when I first started, a lot of our news organizations in the region weren't as well resourced. It was very limiting in terms of technology.
Mm.
I spent time in Samoa just after one of the big cyclones, Cyclone Val, and I worked for 2AP, did some work for 2AP there, and it was really interesting to me. It gave me a real insight into what it's like to work in a newsroom in the Pacific when it's not as well resourced.
Indeed.
I just remember before I had gone to Samoa, when we were talking to our colleagues at 2AP, often they would ask us to, these were the days before the internet for all the young folk out there, but it was fax machines. That's how we used to send stories to a lot of our partner stations. And they said to me, can you please fax the story 20 minutes before the top of the hour? And I thought, oh, that was odd. So I've wondered why. But then when I went to Samoa and I worked in the studio, I realized that the fax machine was in a completely different building. So you actually had to run across the road, get the story off the fax machine, and then come back into the studio to read whatever the was on the fax paper. So yeah, that's a lot has changed since then. And a lot of our correspondence in the old days would, before email, would fax all their stories to us. So we would be manually typing in all the stories into the system as well. So
Wow, that is fascinating indeed. With that in mind, I mean, what are some of the biggest stories you think RNZ Pacific has covered in its history?
I definitely think there was the coups in Fiji definitely were
Mm.
big moments as well, and also recognizing too how obviously it's a challenge for a lot of our media colleagues as well. That's a really important thing to remember as well, what it's like for them, hearing some of the harrowing stories through that.
Mm.
Also, of course, there was the riots in Tonga
Yeah.
as well. That was a very big story for us. We actually remember our correspondent at the time, who had just said that buildings were burning, and so that was a huge, obviously a significant story for RNZ Pacific to cover as well. There's been so many big stories. Also, the changes in the Pacific region that we have seen as a media organization.
Mm.
China is now more present in the Pacific than it was, say, 30 odd years ago when the service started. The US now has re engaged with a lot of other parts of the Pacific. Obviously, they sit in the North Pacific with the Northern Marianas, Marshall Islands,
Mm.
Guam, Palau, but now they're engaging more in the Pacific and other parts of the Pacific. Obviously, everyone is back now in the region, which
Mhm.
has not been a thing more in the past. And also governments also now recognising as they move. Obviously, on Monday, Samoa celebrated its 63rd independence anniversary. A
Indeed.
lot of countries also are recognising the importance of also having their own people as the experts when they cover stories, their own people, their own voices as well, when they want to go on those international platforms as well.
Yeah, indeed. I suppose with all of that in mind, I'm keen to get an understanding of how things work between, say, RNZ and RNZ Pacific, right? So when there is a Pacific story that breaks in the region, does RNZ Pacific take the lead on that?
We do, and we're really, really lucky that we have a really lovely relationship with the newsroom
Mm.
in RNZ. We now sit on the same floor as RNZ, and it's really great to see whenever there are Pacific stories, the RNZ will come to us as the
Cool.
lead on any matters, pronunciation,
Mm.
Pacific stories, because while there are those big stories, obviously Samoa has been a big one, obviously not
Mm.
only for us, but also for PMN and the dissolution of Parliament yesterday.
Mm.
It's those Sometimes it's those cultural nuances that you really need that Pacific insight and Pacific expertise in. So it's a really great relationship. We've worked very well with RNZ over the past few years, and that's really
Mm.
been important because the stories that are important to us also we recognise are important to our Pacific communities in Aotearoa as well as in the region as well.
Indeed. And another question, I'm loving tapping into your brain, by the way. In terms of RNZ Pacific, right? I mean, how does it maintain perhaps cultural relevance and authenticity in its programming?
We've had a few over the years. We've recruitment of staff has also included a lot of young Pacific. As you see, if you've seen our website, we've got a few more Aotearoa-based Pacific stories, and part of that has been also that reflects a lot of our staff who are young, who are Pacific, who want to have really strong ties to their Pacific communities, whether it be in South Auckland, for myself and Porirua as a Porirua girl, that those relationships also form trusts with relations with communities as well.
Indeed.
That's really, really important. In particular with disinformation, it's really important to build those trusted relationships with your community. And if you come from those communities, that also means that they see you as a part of their community. So when you're telling their stories, they know and hope that you will tell it in the way that they would, that is sensitive, that is also really, really trusted, that you are telling their story in a way that you really care about those communities. And that's really, really changed for us as RNZ Pacific. And those are the stories now that we tell. And, a couple of years ago, we didn't have as many Pacific communities in Aotearoa contact us because obviously we've been well known in the Pacific region. But over the years, a few more people, a few more community leaders will ring us, tell us something is on. So that's been really great for us.
Do you think that there is a difference between, say, a mainstream newsroom and a Pacific newsroom? And the reason I ask that is that perhaps, maybe early in my career when I worked for mainstream networks, it's a quick, fast turnaround, and, in a Pacific newsroom, as you touched on, building those relationships and telling the stories authentically. Do you see there's much of a difference between the two?
I've worked in both newsrooms, in the RNZ Pacific newsroom and also in RNZ when I sat on the bulletins desk for a number of years. And to be honest, no, I don't think. I think every story should be treated in the same way that you should treat a mainstream story. So, of course, there are differences in terms of if it's a sensitive cultural issue, there are things that you need to be more aware of. But I think it's also part and parcel of working in the machine, in the big machine news, which we often discuss when we have our 9:30 team meetings, just about the content that you need to provide, because obviously we have hourly deadlines. That's really, really important. But also that when there are those sensitive issues, or these are stories that are more culturally, we need to be, as an organization, need to be more culturally aware about how we see a story, then those stories really do need a bit more time to think about how we look at it, about how we cover it.
Indeed. And look, in terms it's no secret the media landscape, not only here but across the globe at the moment, is going through upheaval. I mean, any way in which you want to characterise it, it is going through a bit of a lull at the moment. In terms of consumer habits and the way in which people engage with content is changing. How do you see RNZ Pacific adapting to that moving forward?
Well, I guess for us and for most media organizations, obviously the biggest challenges are trust
Yeah.
and also AI. I was in Niue last year for the Pacific Island News Association conference, and the big conversation was AI for us, but also for a lot for our communities, our organizations, media organizations in the region. So that's a real big challenge, and also how we deal with it, how we work with it, and how we also think about how our audiences see it. That's definitely a big challenge that for all organizations, not only RNZ Pacific, but RNZ, but most media organizations are trying to tackle, and in particular, definitely for Pacific newsrooms in the region.
Yeah. And how big of a task, just before we wrap this up, how big of a task is it, trying to sift through disinformation and ensure that our audiences and our Pacific community in particular isn't being fed wrong information? How much of a task is that for RNZ Pacific?
I think it's a task for us. It's also a task for PMN when we think about the communities that we work with. I think always for us, we always go to the trusted source whenever we speak about a story in RNZ Pacific. I'm thinking also about, say, our Cyclone Watch service. The information that we broadcast is always from the Met services, are always from the disaster management officers in those countries, that it's not often just of Joe down the road said that he saw some flooding somewhere. It's really important that when you're giving that information, it actually is from authentic and trusted organizations, and also to be able to share that with our communities. It is tough. That's the big challenge really for everyone, but I particular within Pacific communities. But I think we're really, really lucky and fortunate that we've had really good, strong editorial policies behind us,
Good.
and that
Yeah.
really helps guides the work for RNZ Pacific and also for RNZ.
Yeah, that's awesome. Look, before we wrap it up, end on a lighter one perhaps, and more reflection from yourself. I mean, can you think of Pacific personalities who have played key roles at RNZ, like yourself, over the course of RNZ's history?
Goodness, that's tapping into my little brain. We've obviously had, for Morning Report, we've had Kim Hill. I mean, I remember when I started, Kim Hill was one of the presenters on Morning Report. Mike Hoskins, I remember him being on Morning Report. Also, Sean Plunkett. A long time ago, I remember that Tina Turner came to the RNZ building in
Wow.
Wellington down at Broadcasting House because she was going to do an interview with ABC Australia. So I remember that as well. There's been so many interesting, amazing people. I feel that media collects really eclectic and interesting people anyway. So even in the general news media, there's always been really interesting personalities as well, and in the work that we do.
And on your own team, perhaps, are there names you think of?
Oh, I think so many of these. Obviously, a lot of people have passed on
Mm,
since I have been here, but there's been so many interesting, amazing broadcasters that I have met. I've been really blessed to have worked with some of the amazing people. So I won't say who they are because then I might end up crying on PMN. But
yeah.
I think also just the work that was started firstly by Ian Johnston, the original manager of RNZ, and
Mm,
RNZ then back in the day, and then Lyndon Clark, was really to support local journalists. That was always part of the work that they wanted to do, and that's what we still continue to do today, to tell the stories of our communities and tell it in a way that they see it reflects in them as well. That's always been the important part, I think, for me as a journalist, is that,
mm.
it's really important for us to see ourselves reflected in a story. And that then means that we at least know that other people will be able to see and hear the story about us.
Indeed. And just a final note. I know this is a classic journal. I keep going. But just genuinely, final question for you. I mean, you've had longevity at RNZ Pacific. It means something's being done right there. I mean, what are what draws you in every day to head into to work every morning?
I love media, I have to say. And I work with an amazing team, just passionate, young energy about telling the stories of their communities, but also the importance also of telling the important stories that are happening in the Pacific region as well. So I love that. I also love getting the daily bulletins from
Hmm.
Pacific Media Network, from Farmer, from Tauraki, also just the bulletins that also obviously PMN. We have a wonderful relationship with Pacific Media Network, and also you go into the region via our service with your Pacific language bulletin. So it's never a dull day, I have to say. But yeah, I still love media. I still love working in this industry.
No, that's awesome, and love the work that RNZ Pacific does as well. Thank you very much for your time. That is Moera Tuilaepa-Taylor, RNZ Pacific. You have a lovely rest of your day, and thank you for carving out a bit of your time, eh?
Papatai tele lava manuele aso.